The glass shattered against the wall 6 inches from Emily's head. "Get out of my sight!" Gabriel Moretti's voice was ice. "For I do something we'll both regret." The entire restaurant froze. Silverware stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every wealthy, powerful person in that room stared not at Moretti, but at Emily, waiting to see a fat waitress crumble, waiting for tears, waiting for her to shrink into nothing the way she always had. Emily did not move. She looked him dead in the eyes and said quietly and clearly, "You just tried to kill the wrong man tonight, and I'm the only person in this room who can prove it. If you've ever been the person nobody sees, the one everyone looks past, then this story is for you." Subscribe to our channel right now and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She had worked the dinner shift at Benedetti's for 6 years, and in 6 years, not one customer had ever asked her name. That wasn't entirely true. One man had asked back in her second month on the job, a heavy-set accountant from the suburbs who had fumbled with his napkin and knocked over his water glass, and then apologized for 3 solid minutes before finally looking up at her with embarrassed eyes and saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't even ask what's your name." She had told him. He had nodded, smiled, and never came back. Benedetti's was not that kind of restaurant. Benedetti's was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was always dim enough to hide sins and bright enough to show off diamonds, where the wine list ran to 47 pages, where the maitre d', a thin man named Francois, who was actually from Cleveland, greeted every guest by last name and made you feel for exactly 30 seconds like the most important person in the city. Emily Parker was not the maitre d'. Emily Parker was the woman who refilled your water before you noticed it was low, who set down your bread basket and disappeared before you could look up, who absorbed the snapped fingers and the dismissive waves and the complaints about food that was in fact perfect and carried all of it back to the kitchen without letting any of it show on her face. She was 28 years old. She weighed close to 290 pounds. She had dark brown hair she kept pulled back in a practical knot at the base of her neck, and gray eyes that most people never looked into long enough to describe, and hands that were always slightly red from washing them between tables. Because she took the health code seriously even when nobody was watching. She was by every observable measure invisible. And she had learned over the course of 28 years that invisibility was not entirely without its advantages. The kitchen staff called her Emmy. Her mother called her every Sunday at noon. Her landlord called her 3 days before rent was due, which she always resented because she had never once been late. Her co-workers at Benedetti's, a rotating cast of beautiful, ambitious young people who treated the restaurant as a launching pad rather than a destination, called her various things depending on their mood, and most of those things she had learned to let slide off her like water. "Table 12 is asking for more bread," said a voice behind her. Emily was already moving. She had seen table 12 run low 4 minutes ago and had a basket ready on the side counter. The voice belonged to Marco, one of the newer servers, 23, and so handsome it was almost aggressive, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having been laughed at in a locker room. "I've got it," Emily said. Marco glanced at the basket in her hand and then back at her with an expression that contained in roughly equal parts mild surprise and total indifference. "You're always 3 steps ahead," he said, and it was not a compliment. It was an observation delivered the way you might note that a piece of furniture was well positioned, useful, inanimate, already where it needed to be. Emily picked up the basket and walked toward table 12. This was her life. This was the whole of it or most of it, and she had arrived at a kind of peace with that, not the peace of happiness, but the peace of a person who has stopped waiting for something to change. You could call it acceptance. You could call it resignation. On her best days, she called it clarity. She knew what she was. She knew what she wasn't. She had stopped confusing the two. What she had not stopped doing was watching. That was the other thing invisibility gave you. Not just the freedom from being seen, but the extraordinary, almost painful clarity of seeing everything else. When people looked through you, they forgot to guard themselves. They forgot that the woman refilling the water glass could hear, could observe, could remember. Emily remembered everything. She remembered that the man at table 4 always ordered the veal, but always looked slightly guilty about it, and that his wife never ate the veal but never said anything, and that on the 3 occasions when they had dined without each other, they had both ordered the pasta and seemed genuinely happier. She remembered that the senator who came in every other Thursday had a shellfish allergy he never mentioned to the kitchen because he was too proud to seem high maintenance, and that she had quietly ensured for 2 years that his food was prepared without cross-contamination, without ever telling him she was doing it. She remembered which regulars were actually happy in their marriages and which ones were performing, and she could tell the difference within about 45 seconds of them sitting down from the way they reached for each other's hands or didn't. She noticed everything. It was the only thing she had ever been genuinely good at. The December evening when everything changed started like every other December evening at Benedetti's, which is to say it started in controlled chaos. The holidays brought out a particular kind of customer, people with more money than usual and more stress than usual, and less patience than usual, people who were performing generosity and warmth for tables full of colleagues and family members, while quietly fantasizing about being somewhere else entirely. Emily moved through the dining room with the efficiency of someone who had memorized the floor plan down to the inch which she had. She knew exactly how wide the gaps between tables were. She knew which chairs were slightly unsteady on their legs. She knew that table 7 sat in a draft that the management refused to acknowledge, and that any guest seated there would begin complaining about being cold within 20 minutes of sitting down. So she always brought an extra bread basket to table 7 because warmth helps. At 8:47 in the evening, Gabriel Moretti arrived. She knew who he was in the way that everyone in Chicago knew who Gabriel Moretti was, which was the same way they knew the lake was cold and the winters were brutal, as a fact of existence not particularly worth examining. He was on the business pages regularly. His name appeared in the society columns. He donated to hospital wings and university libraries, and his name was on buildings in 3 different neighborhoods, which was either evidence of extraordinary generosity or extraordinary calculation. And in Emily's experience, those 2 things were rarely as distinct as people like to pretend. He came to Benedetti's perhaps once a month. He always sat at the same table, booth 12 in the back corner, where the lighting was slightly lower, and the angle of the room meant you could see the entrance without being easily seen from it. He always ordered the same wine. He always tipped with the kind of precision that suggested someone who understood the mathematics of service better than most, not extravagant, not stingy, exactly what the situation merited. He had never, in 6 years of dining at Benedetti's, spoken a single word directly to Emily Parker. But he had also never done the thing that so many of his type did. He had never looked through her. It was a small distinction, almost imperceptible, the difference between a man who doesn't acknowledge you and a man who actively treats you as less than furniture. Gabriel Moretti occupied the former category. His eyes moved through the room with the constant, contained alertness of someone who had learned to always know where all the exits were, and when those eyes passed over Emily, which they did, because they passed over everything, there was something in them that acknowledged her existence. Not warmly, not particularly, just honestly, as if she were a real person in the room, which she had learned was not as common a quality as it should have been. She noticed this because she noticed everything. She had not thought much about it beyond that. Gabriel Moretti was a customer who happened to treat her like a human being in a world full of customers who didn't, and she was grateful for it, the way you were grateful for small, ordinary mercies, briefly and without expectation. He arrived that evening with 2 other men. One of them she recognized, Vincent Caruso, who appeared in the society pages almost as often as Moretti himself, always described as a business associate, always photographed slightly behind and to the left of more important people, with the careful positioning of a man who understood power dynamics at a cellular level. He had a face that was difficult to remember despite being perfectly symmetrical, the kind of face designed to blend into backgrounds, which Emily had always found interesting because that was exactly the kind of face she found hardest to trust. The other man was a stranger. She cataloged him in the way she cataloged everyone late 40s well-dressed, but in a way that was slightly off, like someone wearing a uniform they'd borrowed, rather than one that belonged to them. Heavy set, but not soft. He moved carefully for his size, with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent a long time controlling how much space he took up. His eyes were the kind of dark that didn't reflect much light, and they moved around the room in a pattern that was just slightly too systematic to be casual. She had been working at Benedetti's for 6 years. She had seen a lot of powerful men have dinner together. She had learned through sheer accumulated observation that there was a particular quality to meals that were actually negotiations, a tension that lived in the pauses rather than the words, a way that people reached for their water glasses at the wrong moments, a kind of careful stillness that was the opposite of comfort. This meal had that quality. She brought them their menus. Moretti nodded without looking up. Caruso smiled the smile of a man who had practiced it in a mirror. The stranger watched her with those dark, careful eyes and said nothing at all. She went back to the other tables. She refilled water glasses. She accepted a complaint from a woman at table 3 about the temperature of the risotto, which was, she happened to know, exactly correct, and she apologized anyway because apologies cost nothing and arguments cost considerably more. She checked the time. She did the mental arithmetic of her section, tracking progress, anticipating needs. She was pouring water at table 9 when she noticed the man who was not with anyone. He was seated at the bar, which was not unusual. The bar at Benedetti's did a solid business, independent of the dining room businessmen, unwinding couples on early dates working up the courage to be honest with each other. A lone man at the bar was unremarkable, except that this particular lone man was not drinking. He had a glass of something amber in front of him, and it had not moved in 20 minutes. And his eyes, when they moved, which was rarely and carefully, always came to rest on booth 12. Emily carried the water pitcher back to the service station. She set it down. She picked up a fresh bread basket for table 7 because table 7 always needed more bread. She thought about the man at the bar. She thought about the way Caruso had smiled when they'd sat down, that practiced, polished expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. She thought about the stranger across from Moretti, the way he moved like someone performing stillness rather than feeling it. She was getting ahead of herself. She was a waitress. She refilled water glasses. She was projecting narratives onto wealthy men having dinner because she had too much time in her head and not enough in her life. And this was what happened when you spent 6 years watching people instead of being one of them. She delivered the bread to table 7. The woman seated there, 50s, kind-faced pearls that were real, looked up at her and said, "Oh, thank you, dear," in the warm, slightly surprised way people thanked Emily when they noticed her, as if gratitude required a moment of adjustment, as if they had to remember that she was in fact a person you could be grateful to. "Of course," Emily said. She turned back toward the service station, and that was when she saw it. The man at the bar had finally moved. He had shifted slightly on his stool, a small adjustment that brought him closer to the end of the bar, nearest to the kitchen entrance, which was the closest unobserved approach to the back section of the dining room, specifically to booth 12. And in making that adjustment, his jacket had shifted. She could see the outline clearly, a rectangular shape in his inside breast pocket. Not a phone she knew what a phone looked like under fabric. Not a wallet. The wrong shape, the wrong weight, the way the fabric pulled. The room went very quiet around her, the kind of quiet that happens inside your own skull when your body understands something slightly before your mind does. She stood at the service station and she thought with remarkable clarity, for someone whose hands had begun to shake, I could be wrong. I have been wrong before. I am a waitress, and I have been reading too much into a dinner that is probably just dinner, and that shape could be anything. But she had been watching people for 6 years, and she knew what she knew. And she had spent 28 years being wrong about herself, about her worth, about her value, about what she deserved, and she had promised herself, in the small, private way of promises nobody else ever hears, that she was going to stop second-guessing the things she actually knew. She set down the bread basket she was still holding. She walked steadily and without hurrying toward the bar. The bar at Benedetti's was staffed that evening by a young man named Derek, who was 26 and studying for the Illinois bar exam in every spare moment, who poured drinks with one hand and reviewed evidence law with the other, metaphorically speaking. Emily had always liked Derek. He was the kind of person who was so busy becoming who he was going to be that he didn't have much energy left over for performing. She reached the bar. She stood 2 stools down from the man who was not drinking. She caught Derek's eye and made a small gesture, not dramatic, not obviously significant, just a slight chin lift of someone who needs to communicate something quietly, which she and Derek had developed over 2 years of working together in a restaurant where the guests' moods were volatile, and the management preferred that any problems be resolved before they became visible. Derek came over. His expression was professionally neutral. "Can you call Francois?" Emily said quietly. "Tell him there's a situation with the beverage delivery that needs his immediate attention in the back office." Use those exact words. Derek looked at her. Derek was smart. He'd been studying evidence law. "The beverage delivery," he repeated. "Right now," Emily said. "Please." Derek reached under the bar for the house phone. The man 2 stools down had not moved. His glass was still untouched. Emily reached behind the bar, a thing servers weren't supposed to do technically, but the rule was observed loosely in practice, and picked up the small white cloth Derek used for polishing glasses. She set it down on the bar top, adjusted it slightly, and in doing so managed to bump the man's untouched glass with her elbow. The amber liquid splashed across the bar, a small tidal wave, perfectly accidental. "Oh my gosh!" Emily said loudly enough to be heard, but not loudly enough to turn heads at the nearby tables. "I am so sorry, let me—" She was already reaching for the cloth, already creating the small, necessary commotion of a spill, being cleaned, already generating exactly enough movement and attention in mild embarrassment to make the man feel seen and conspicuous. Because a man with something to hide does not want to be conspicuous. The man's eyes came to her for the first time. Up close, they were exactly as she'd assessed from across the room. Dark and careful and not warm. "Clumsy," he said. It wasn't an acceptance of the apology. "I really am sorry," Emily said, mopping at the bar with the cloth, her body language apologetic and flustered, her eyes quick and assessing. "Can I get you another on the house? Absolutely. I'll let Derek know." "I'm leaving," the man said. He stood. He settled his jacket with the deliberate care of someone mindful of what it contained. He did not look at booth 12. He was too careful for that. He looked at the door and then he walked toward it, not hurrying, because hurrying would be conspicuous. Emily watched him go. Her heart was hammering. She became aware of this as a physical fact, the way you become aware that you've been holding your breath only when you finally exhale. Derek appeared at her elbow. "Francois is on his way. What's the actual situation?" Emily watched the door close behind the man. "I don't know yet," she said, which was not entirely true. Francois arrived from the back with the expression of a man bracing for bad news, which after 22 years in the restaurant industry was essentially his resting face. Emily drew him into the small alcove near the coat check and spoke quietly and quickly, and to his credit, Francois listened without interrupting, which was not his default setting, but which he deployed on the occasions when he sensed the situation merited it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You could be wrong," he said. "I know. This could be nothing. I know that too. If you're right," he said slowly, "and we go to Mr. Moretti's table and we're obvious about it." "We don't go to his table," Emily said. "You call the number on the card in the security binder. The one we're supposed to call if there's a threat to a guest." Francois stared at her. "I know about the card," Emily said. "I know about all the procedures. I've worked here for 6 years." Another pause. Francois was a man who operated on protocol and precedent, and this was a situation where protocol and precedent were of limited use. "The man is gone," he said finally. "He's gone for now," Emily said, "but someone sent him, and someone at that booth either knows there's a threat or doesn't. Either way, Mr. Moretti's security should know there was a man watching his table for 40 minutes without drinking his drink." Francois smoothed the front of his jacket, which was a habitual gesture, and meant he had made a decision. "I'll make the call," he said. Emily went back to the floor. She refilled water glasses. She brought extra bread to table 7. She apologized to the woman at table 3 again, not because she needed to, but because the woman had the particular brittle energy of someone who had been having a very hard December and needed to feel heard more than she needed to feel right. And Emily understood that distinction. She did not look at booth 12. She refused to look at booth 12 because she was painfully acutely aware that if anyone at that table was watching the room, and at least one of the men at that table was certainly watching the room, a waitress staring at their booth would be a thing worth noticing. She kept moving. At 9:23, 2 men she had not seen before entered through the service entrance at the back of the restaurant. They were large and quiet and had the distinct particular stillness of men paid to occupy space efficiently. One of them spoke briefly to Francois near the kitchen door. The other took a position near the corridor that led to the restrooms, casual, unremarkable, unless you knew to look. Emily kept moving. At 9:41, the dinner at booth 12 concluded. Gabriel Moretti stood, shook hands with the stranger across from him, exchanged something brief and quiet with the Caruso, and moved toward the front of the restaurant. His security moved with him, their presence suddenly obvious now that she was watching for it, the casual way bodies shifted to accommodate and surround. Vincent Caruso remained behind for a moment. He sat alone in the booth. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone and sat looking at it with an expression that Emily from across the room could not quite read. She picked up a water pitcher and moved toward the section near booth 12. She was not going to the booth. She was going to table 11, which was adjacent and which genuinely needed water, because she had been tracking table 11's hydration levels for the past 20 minutes with a kind of dedicated attention that would have seemed excessive to anyone who didn't understand that watching tables was how she watched everything. She reached table 11. She poured water. She was 4 feet from booth 12. Vincent Caruso was still looking at his phone. He said very quietly to no one visible, "It's done." And then he put the phone away and stood and adjusted his jacket and walked toward the front of the restaurant with the easy, unbothered confidence of a man who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Emily stood with the water pitcher in her hand. The dining room continued around her. Forks scraped plates. Someone laughed at a distant table. The ambient sound of warmth and wealth and celebration. She stood very still for a moment. Then she set the pitcher down and walked to the back of the restaurant, to the small office where Francois did his paperwork, and she knocked twice and opened the door. Francois was on the phone. He looked up when she entered. His face told her something had happened, or was happening, that the call she'd set in motion had traveled somewhere it needed to go, that she had not been wrong. He held the phone slightly away from his ear and looked at her. "They want to know," he said carefully, "who saw this." Emily straightened her back. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She thought about 6 years of water pitchers and bread baskets and apologies for things that were not her fault. She thought about the shape under the man's jacket. She thought about Vincent Caruso's phone and his 2 quiet words in an empty booth. "Tell them," she said, "that it was the waitress." Francois relayed this. There was a pause on the other end of the call. "They want to speak with her," Francois said. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something between deference and genuine uncertainty, which was a combination she associated with people confronting situations outside their frame of reference. Emily held out her hand for the phone. Francois hesitated for only a moment before he gave it to her. She pressed it to her ear. "This is Emily Parker," she said. "I'm the one who called it in. I can tell you what I saw, and I can tell you that the man who sat in booth 12 tonight with Mr. Moretti needs to know that someone very close to him sent a problem that I walked out the door before it could become something worse. I don't know what you do with that information, but I know what I saw." There was silence on the other end of the line. Not the silence of disbelief, the silence of someone reassessing. "Stay where you are," said the voice on the other end of the phone. It was a deep voice, careful and controlled. "Don't speak to anyone else about this. Mr. Moretti will want to speak with you personally." Emily looked at the phone. She looked at Francois, who was watching her with the expression of a man watching something he had not anticipated. She thought about the woman at table 7 with the genuine pearls. She thought about Marco, who had noted her competence with the mild indifference of someone acknowledging that furniture was well placed. She thought about 6 years of being the person nobody saw. "All right," she said into the phone. And something in the room shifted. She could feel it, not dramatically, not with trumpets, but in the small, specific way of a lock giving way after years of pressure. Something that had been one way was now another. She stayed where she was. She waited. And in the dining room beyond the office door, Benedetti's continued its elegant, oblivious evening, candles burning, low music, soft and undemanding. Guests finishing their desserts and calling for the check and preparing to step back into the cold Chicago night, unaware that the woman who had refilled their water glasses and brought their bread and absorbed their impatience had just quietly and without any fanfare at all changed the entire trajectory of her life. She didn't know that yet. She only knew that she had seen something true and she had acted on it, and whatever came next, whatever walked through that office door in the shape of Gabriel Moretti and his carefully controlled world, she was going to face it the same way she faced everything, watching, ready, exactly as she had always been, just finally for the first time seen. The office door opened at 10:17. Emily knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock on Francois's desk with the focused intensity of someone who needed something concrete to hold on to, and the clock was the most concrete thing in the room. 10:17. She had been sitting in that small, paper-cluttered office for 34 minutes, and in those 34 minutes she had replayed every decision she had made that evening approximately 11 times and had arrived each time at the same conclusion. She had done what she had done, and there was no version of tonight where she did otherwise. The man who walked through the door was not Gabriel Moretti. He was large, not tall exactly, but broad in the way of someone who had spent years making himself difficult to move, with a face that was all flat planes and hard angles, and a pair of eyes that assessed the room in the first half second and then settled on Emily, with the particular quality of attention that made her feel briefly like a document being reviewed for errors. "Ms. Parker," he said, not a question. "Yes?" "My name is Sal." He didn't offer a last name. He pulled the chair across from her, away from the desk, and sat in it without asking permission, which told her something about the kind of man he was. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you." "I was told that," Emily said. "Before that happens," Sal said, "I need to ask you some questions." She had expected this. She folded her hands in her lap, not because she was nervous, though she was nervous acutely. Her stomach doing the particular thing it did when she was forcing herself to stay still, against every instinct, but because folding her hands gave them something to do that wasn't visible, shaking. "Ask," she said. Sal leaned forward slightly. "How did you know?" "I watched him for 40 minutes, Emily said. "He never drank. His eyes went to booth 12 every 30 to 45 seconds on a rotation. When he shifted on the stool, his jacket moved, and I saw the outline of something in his inside breast pocket that wasn't a wallet and wasn't a phone." Sal was quiet for a moment. Most people wouldn't have caught that. "Most people aren't looking," Emily said. Another pause, slightly longer. The quality of it changed, less interrogation, more recalibration. "What made you act on it instead of just noting it?" This was the harder question. Emily had been sitting with it for 34 minutes, and she still wasn't entirely sure of the answer. Or rather, she was sure of the answer, but uncertain whether to say it out loud to this large, flat-faced man in Francois's cluttered office. She decided on honesty because dishonesty required energy she didn't have left. "Because I've spent a long time knowing things and not saying them," she said, "and I'm tired of it." Sal looked at her. Something in his expression shifted by a fraction, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The involuntary acknowledgement of one person by another when they hear something true. He stood. "Come with me." Gabriel Moretti was waiting in the private dining room at the back of Benedetti's, a room Emily had been in perhaps a dozen times over 6 years for staff meetings, for the occasional private event set up for the 2 times management had called her in to address complaints. It was a smaller room, quieter, with a single long table and chairs arranged with the precision of a room that understood its own importance. He was standing when she entered, not seated, not positioned behind the table in the power arrangement she might have expected. Standing near the window, his jacket off his sleeves rolled to the forearm in the way of a man who had stopped performing for the evening and was now operating in whatever mode was underneath the performance. He looked, she thought, tired. Not physically, he had the kind of constitution that probably didn't tire easily. But there was something around his eyes that hadn't been there when he'd walked into the restaurant earlier, a weight that had settled while she wasn't watching. He turned when she entered. His eyes moved over her with the same quality she had noted before, honest, complete, the assessment of someone who actually looked. "Sit down, Ms. Parker," he said. "Emily," she said, "please." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Emily," he gestured to the chairs. They sat across from each other. Sal took a position near the door that was casual enough to be unremarkable and deliberate enough to be unmistakable. Gabriel Moretti folded his hands on the table and looked at her. "You've worked here 6 years, he said. "Yes." "I've eaten here perhaps once a month for most of those 6 years. "Roughly," Emily said. "There were 3 months in 2021 when you didn't come in." He stopped. Something shifted in his expression, not alarm, but the particular quality of attention that sharpened when he encountered something unexpected. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Emily said. And then, because honesty had gotten her this far, "You're easy to track. You're consistent. Consistent people are easy to remember." A pause. He was still looking at her with that sharpened attention, the way you looked at something you had been passing every day for years and had suddenly noticed contained more than you'd assumed. "Tonight," he said, "tell me what you saw." She told him. All of it in the order it happened, without editorializing or softening. The man at the bar, the glass that didn't move, the rotation of his gaze toward booth 12, the shift of the jacket, the outline. Her decision to create the spill, to make him conspicuous, to walk him toward the door without ever touching him or confronting him directly. She told him about Caruso. This was the part she had been building toward the part she had been sitting with for 34 minutes. The part that felt like walking to the edge of something and stepping off. Vincent Caruso stayed in the booth after you left, she said, for approximately 90 seconds. He took out his phone. He said 2 words. She held Gabriel Moretti's gaze. He said, "It's done." The room went very still. Sal near the door had stopped moving in the particular way of someone who has received information they were expecting and had hoped not to receive. Gabriel Moretti did not move at all. His face did something complicated and controlled the face of a man processing something through layers of discipline that had been built over a long time for exactly this purpose. She watched it happen and was struck suddenly and unexpectedly by how exhausting it must be. To have a face like that, to have built a life that required that kind of constant internal architecture. "You're certain," he said. His voice was flat and even and told her nothing. "I heard what I heard," Emily said. "I'm not certain what it means. I'm certain about what I saw and what I heard." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then why are you telling me this?" Emily blinked. She had not expected the question in that form. She had expected, "What do you want?" She had expected skepticism or dismissal, or the particular brand of polite condescension that powerful men deployed when they needed to manage inconvenient information delivered by unimportant people. She had not expected why. "Because it's true," she said. "That's not enough," Gabriel said. "Plenty of people know true things and keep them to themselves. Why would you put yourself in this position? Why would you involve yourself in something that has nothing to do with you?" She felt something in her chest tighten. Not pain, more like the feeling of something being pressed on that had been left alone for a long time. "You want the real answer," she said. "I wouldn't have asked for any other kind." She looked at him. He looked at her. In 6 years, this was the first time they had actually looked at each other, and it was strange and uncomfortable, and also somehow exactly right. "Because you never made me feel like I wasn't there," Emily said. "In 6 years of coming into this restaurant, you have never looked through me. You've never snapped your fingers at me. You've never made a comment about my size or my speed or my—" She stopped, breathed, continued. "Every other person who sits in your position in this restaurant treats me like furniture that talks. You don't. And I know that's a very low bar, and I know it probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it meant something to me. So when I saw what I saw tonight, I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't seen it." The silence in the room was different now. Gabriel Moretti was looking at her with an expression she could not categorize, which was unusual because she was very good at categorizing expressions. It wasn't pity. It wasn't discomfort. It was something more careful and more honest than either of those things. "I treat you like a person," he said slowly, "because you are one." "You'd be surprised," Emily said, "how many people in this room on any given night have managed to miss that." Something in him changed when she said that. She watched it happen, a subtle structural shift, the way a building settles, as if something had landed that he hadn't been braced for. He stood. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, not dismissively, but in the way of someone who needed a half-second of privacy for something his face was doing that he hadn't decided yet whether to share. Then he turned back. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer me honestly, not carefully. Not the way people answer me when they're afraid of me. The way you just answered me." Emily's heart rate climbed steadily. "All right. Why would you risk yourself," Gabriel Moretti said, "to protect a man that everyone else in this city fears?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. She felt its weight. It was not the question she had expected, which had been some version of, "What do you want from this?" or "How much?" or "What are you going to do with what you know?" This question had a different shape entirely. This question was not about tonight. This question was about her. She understood with the sudden clarity of someone who has been solving the wrong equation for years and has just noticed the error that he was not asking about his own safety. He was asking about hers. He was asking, what kind of person does this? Not to assess a threat, but to understand a human being. She took a breath. "Because the people who have spent my entire life deciding I'm not worth looking at," Emily said, "tend to make that decision without asking me a single question first." They see what they expect to see and they stop there. And the thing about living that way, being decided about before you're spoken to, is that you get very good at recognizing the difference between someone who has written you off and someone who hasn't. She paused. You haven't. In 6 years, you haven't. And I don't know what that says about you exactly, but it says something. And when it came down to the moment where I could either act on what I knew or pretend I hadn't seen it, I chose to act. Because ignoring things that matter is something I have done enough of in my own life. I'm done ignoring things that matter. She stopped talking. The room was absolutely quiet. Gabriel Moretti stood across the table from her and looked at her with an expression that had abandoned all its architecture, all the careful, controlled management of a man who had spent decades making sure his face never gave anything away. And what was underneath was something simpler and considerably less armored. I've had people tell me what I wanted to hear for 20 years, he said quietly. I have paid people specifically to tell me what I want to hear, and they are very good at it, and I have learned to account for it in everything I receive. I have not, he said, in a very long time had someone in this room who said what was simply true. Emily said nothing. She could feel that words right now would cost more than silence. Caruso has been with me for 11 years, Gabriel said. The words came out flat and even, the way you read something aloud that you are still in the process of believing. He was at my brother's wedding. He was at my father's funeral. He is the person I would have told you this morning that I trusted without condition. I'm sorry, Emily said. And she meant it not the reflexive apology she deployed at table 3 for risotto. That was the correct temperature, but the real kind, the kind that acknowledged that what she had told him had cost him something. He heard the difference. She could tell by the way he accepted it, not dismissing it, not managing it, just letting it land. The man at the bar, he said. He's gone, Emily said. I walked him out before anything happened. You walked him out, Gabriel repeated, and there was something in his voice that was not quite disbelief and not quite admiration, but lived in the territory between them. I spilled a drink on him, Emily said. I made him uncomfortable enough that staying felt riskier than leaving. He walked out on his own. I didn't touch him. A beat. You managed that, Gabriel said, while serving 4 other tables. 5, Emily said. Table 9 was in my section tonight. Something happened in Gabriel Moretti's expression that she had not seen there in 6 years of watching him. He laughed. It was brief and it was real, and it transformed his face into something that looked for a moment startlingly ordinary, in the best possible way, the face of a person rather than a position. Then the laugh faded and the weight came back, because the weight was not going anywhere. Vincent Caruso had said 2 words into a phone, and those 2 words were sitting in the room with them now and would be for a long time. I need to understand something, Gabriel said. He pulled his chair back and sat down across from her again, which felt like a decision, the deliberate returning of himself to her level. What you did tonight, calling it in, speaking to Sal, coming into this room and telling me what you heard. You understood the risk of that. Yes, Emily said. You understood that what you heard could be taken wrong, that I might decide you were a problem rather than a solution. Yes, and you came anyway. I came anyway. He studied her. The silence stretched, and she sat in it without trying to fill it, because she had learned that silence was often the most honest thing in a conversation. The part where people showed you what they were actually thinking instead of what they had decided to say. What do you want? He said finally. Nothing, Emily said. He shook his head slightly. Everyone wants something. I want to go home, Emily said. I want to take off these shoes because I've been on my feet for 8 hours, and I want to sit in my apartment and probably feel afraid for a little while about everything that happened tonight, and then I want to sleep. She held his gaze. That's actually what I want. I'm not in your world, Mr. Moretti. I don't want what's in it. I just wasn't willing to watch something happen that I could prevent, and now I've told you what I know, and I'd like to go home. Gabriel Moretti sat back in his chair. He looked at her for a long time, not aggressively, not with calculation, with something that had the quality of genuine study. Like a man encountering a thing he had not expected to encounter, and taking the time to understand it properly rather than rushing toward a conclusion. You said you notice everything, he said. I said I watch people. What do you notice about me? The question surprised her. She was quiet for a moment, running the honest answer against the diplomatic answer and deciding, because honesty had gotten her this far, to give him the honest one. I notice that you're smarter than you let most people see, Emily said. I notice that you're tired in a way that has nothing to do with tonight. I noticed that when you walked into this restaurant this evening, you were already carrying something heavy before you sat down, and the man you had dinner with made it heavier, and Caruso made it heaviest of all. She paused. I noticed that you asked me why I protected you before you asked me what I wanted, which is not the order most people would ask those questions. And I noticed that when I told you the truth just now, your face did something it probably doesn't do very often. What did it do? He asked quietly. It relaxed, Emily said. The room was still. Somewhere beyond the door, Benedetti's was finishing its evening checks being settled. Coats being retrieved the restaurant, exhaling after a long night of being everything everyone needed it to be. Sal near the door had the particular stillness of a man pretending very hard not to be listening. Gabriel Moretti looked at his hands on the table. He turned them over once, looking at his palms in the way of someone consulting something internal. I have a proposal, he said. Emily felt something pull tight in her stomach. I told you I'm not looking for anything. I heard you, he said. This isn't about what you're looking for. It's about what I need. She waited. I have a problem, Gabriel said. The problem is that I don't know how deep it goes. Caruso has been in position for 11 years, and if he has been compromised, or if he has been something worse than compromised, then I don't know what he has touched. I don't know which conversations he was present for. I don't know which relationships he has managed on my behalf. I don't know, he said carefully. Who else in my organization I am currently wrong about? Emily listened. My security team, he continued, is good, Imran. They are trained, they are loyal, they are extremely good at the things security teams are trained to be good at, but they are visible. When they walk into a room, people know what they are. They change the behavior of everyone around them. He looked at her. You don't. The silence returned, but it had a different shape now. You have been in this restaurant for 6 years, Gabriel said. And in that time, you have apparently memorized the behavioral patterns of every significant person who walks through that door. You caught something tonight that 4 professional security personnel in this building missed. You resolved it without creating a scene, without alerting the target, and without anyone in this dining room knowing that anything had happened at all. He paused. That is not a small skill, Emily. She heard her name in his mouth, and something in her chest did something unexpected. What are you asking? She said. I'm asking you to consider. Gabriel Moretti said whether a woman who notices everything might find a use for those skills in a context that is somewhat larger than this dining room. Emily sat very still. This was the moment. She could feel it, the specific gravity of it, the way certain moments arrive with their own weight and demanded that you stand up straight inside them. She thought about Marco saying, "You're always 3 steps ahead," in the voice of someone describing a piece of furniture. She thought about 6 years of bread baskets and water pitchers and apologies for food that was correctly prepared. She thought about the woman at table 3 who needed to feel heard more than she needed to be right, and how Emily had known that within 45 seconds of approaching the table, and how that kind of knowing was worth something, even if nothing in her life so far had confirmed it. She thought about 28 years of being decided about before being asked. She thought about the question Gabriel Moretti had asked her. Not what do you want? Not what are you going to do with what you know, but why? Why would you risk yourself? No one had ever asked her why before. Not like that. I need to think about it, Emily said. Gabriel Moretti nodded once as if this were exactly the answer he had expected, and it had confirmed something he wanted confirmed. Take the time you need, he said. But Emily, he waited until her eyes came to his. I want you to understand something. What I'm offering is not charity. It is not a reward for tonight, though tonight earned it. I am telling you that you have a capability that is genuinely rare, and I am asking you to consider using it, because I have a situation that needs exactly what you have. He stood. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a card on the table, plain white, a number and nothing else. When you've decided, he said, call that number. It goes directly to Sal. He moved toward the door. Mr. Moretti, Emily said. He stopped. Vincent Caruso, she said. Whatever you decide to do about what I told you, be careful. A man who has been in position for 11 years knows a lot of things. And a man who knows a lot of things and thinks he's about to be found out. She stopped. chose the words. He's more dangerous when he's scared than when he's confident. Gabriel Moretti stood in the doorway with his back to her. For a moment, just one, she saw his shoulders do what his face so rarely did. They told the truth. I know, he said quietly. And then he walked out and Sal followed, and Emily sat alone in Francois's private dining room with a plain white card on the table in front of her, and the sound of Benedetti settling into the end of its evening all around her. She picked up the card. She turned it over in her hands. She thought about everything she had spent 28 years knowing about people, all the accumulated observation of a lifetime of being overlooked, all the reading of rooms and patterns and silences, and the language that lived in what people didn't say. And she thought about what it would mean to use it. Not here, not in this dining room, not in service of water glasses and bread baskets, but somewhere that required it, somewhere that needed exactly what she was. She put the card in the pocket of her uniform. She stood. She smoothed the front of her apron. She pushed open the door and walked back into the restaurant where the last few guests were gathering their coats and the bus staff were quietly resetting tables, and Marco was cashing out his receipts with the bored efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years and expected to do it for years more. He didn't look up when she passed. She had known he wouldn't. But for the first time in a very long time, the invisibility didn't land the same way. It didn't settle into her bones the way it usually did. It sat differently, lighter almost, or maybe just differently weighted, redistributed. Because she understood now, walking through that dining room at the end of a night that had been unlike any other, that there was a difference between being invisible because you didn't matter and being invisible because you were watching. She had always been the second kind. She had just spent 28 years believing she was the first. She pushed through the kitchen door. She picked up her bag from her locker. She said goodnight to the line cooks who nodded, and to Derek, who was still behind the bar studying for his evidence exam, and who looked up briefly and said, "You okay?" with the specific precision of someone who knew something had happened and was giving her the option of acknowledging it or not. "I'm fine," Emily said, "and good night, Derek." She walked out into the December cold. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the air hit her sharp and honest and real. And she put her hand in her pocket and felt the corner of the card there. She had a decision to make. She already knew what it was going to be. She called the number at 7:43 the following morning. She had not slept well, not from fear exactly. She had moved past fear somewhere around 2 in the morning when she had sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold and had the quiet, methodical conversation with herself that she reserved for decisions that actually mattered. She had laid it out the way she laid out everything. What she knew, what she didn't know, what the risk was, what the cost of not acting had been every time she had chosen that option before. By 4 in the morning, she had drunk the cold tea and gone to bed. By 7:30, she was dressed. Sal answered on the second ring. "I've made my decision." "Asian," Emily said, a pause, then, "Mr. Moretti will want to meet this morning. Can you be at the Aldridge building on Michigan Avenue by 9? Arthur?" She looked at the clock on her kitchen wall. "Yes." She was there at 8:52. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Gabriel was already seated when she arrived this time, with 2 other men she didn't recognize, and a woman named Claire, who had the precise, unhurried manner of someone who processed information for a living and had learned to make it look effortless. There were documents on the table, not contracts, nothing so formal but outlines, frameworks, a picture of what the next several weeks might look like if Emily said yes, drawn in careful, practical terms that told her Gabriel had spent part of his night thinking through this with the same seriousness she had. He did not greet her warmly. He greeted her accurately, which she was already learning was his register, direct, specific, without the social padding that most people use to soften the edges of what they actually meant. "You came," he said. "I said I would think about it," Emily said, sitting down. "I thought about it." Something passed between them, not a smile exactly, but the acknowledgement of a smile. Claire slid a folder across the table. "We'll start simple," she said. "Background, context, what we know, what we don't. You'll have time to review before anything is asked of you." Emily opened the folder. What was inside was not simple. In the 3 weeks that followed, Emily Parker's life changed in ways she had not anticipated and could not entirely track in real time, which was disorienting for a person who prided herself on tracking everything. She did not quit Benedetti's immediately. Gabriel had suggested, with the careful reasoning of someone who had thought it through, that a sudden departure would be noticed, and noticed changes generated questions. And questions were expensive right now. She continued her shifts, continued refilling water glasses and delivering bread baskets, continued absorbing the invisible furniture treatment with a patience she had spent a lifetime developing. But she was also now doing something else. 3 times a week in the evenings after her shifts, she met with Claire in a nondescript office 2 blocks from the Aldridge building and debriefed on everything she had absorbed during the day. Not just at Benedetti's, Gabriel's world had quickly expanded what she was observing. She began attending events, charity functions, business dinners, the peripheral gatherings that orbited power without being power directly. She attended them in her capacity as nothing as the assistant Claire described her as, when introductions became necessary, which was rarely, because in most of these rooms, Emily Parker was still furniture, and furniture did not require introduction. She had not anticipated how strange it would feel to walk into those rooms and deploy her invisibility intentionally. It had always been done to her. Now she was choosing it. The distinction felt enormous and sometimes vertiginous, like standing in a familiar place and realizing the floor was 2 inches lower than you'd always thought. "How do you do that?" Claire asked her one evening, looking up from her notepad. They were 3 weeks in. Emily had just finished recounting in precise detail the private conversation she had overheard between 2 of Gabriel's business associates at a fundraiser for a children's hospital, a conversation that had taken place in a corridor outside the main event between 2 men who had checked the corridor for witnesses and found it empty because neither of them had looked at Emily. "Do what?" Emily said. "Remember all of it, word for word." "I've always done it," Emily said. "I never had a reason not to." Claire tapped her pen against the notepad. "Most people who are good at observation are bad at recall. The information comes in faster than it can be stored. You retain it at the same rate you receive it." She paused. "Do you know how unusual that is?" "Nobody ever told me it was unusual," Emily said. "Nobody ever asked." Claire looked at her for a moment with an expression Emily was learning to recognize, the slightly arrested quality of someone processing a thing that was simple and large at the same time. "Well," Claire said, and went back to her notepad. At the 4-week mark, something changed in the shape of what Emily was being asked to do. It happened at a private dinner at a venue she had not been to before, a smaller, quieter event. 18 people, the kind of gathering where everyone knew everyone and the conversation moved quickly between social and substantive, without the participants always noticing the shift. Emily was there as the assistant to a woman named Diana Voss, a philanthropist who, as Emily had been briefed, loosely connected to several of Gabriel's legitimate business interests and had agreed, through channels Emily didn't entirely understand, to provide cover for Emily's presence. Diana Voss was 61 and magnificent, in the specific way of women who had stopped caring what magnificence looked like from the outside and had started building it from the inside. She had white hair she wore short and a laugh that arrived without warning and took up the full amount of space it needed. "So you're Gabriel's secret weapon," Diana said in the car on the way to the event. She said it without looking at Emily, watching the city past the window. Emily considered how to answer this. "I'm someone who pays attention," she said finally. Diana glanced at her then. "That's the same thing," she said, "in Gabriel's world at least." The dinner itself was unremarkable on the surface. 18 people, good food, the performance of relationship between people who needed each other professionally and had long since learned to package that necessity as warmth. Emily sat 2 seats from Diana, as an assistant would present enough to be available and peripheral enough to be ignorable. She was watching a man named Richard Holt. Holt was one of Gabriel's senior associates she had been briefed on. Him knew the outline. 54 finance background, had been in Gabriel's orbit for 7 years longer in the broader world of Chicago money. He had a wife who wasn't at this dinner, and a glass of wine he had refilled 3 times in the first 40 minutes, which was not itself significant but was data. What was significant was the way he spoke to the man seated directly across from him. The man's name was Philip Graves. He appeared in none of the briefing materials Emily had reviewed. He was introduced briefly as a colleague of one of the other guests, which was the kind of introduction that explained nothing while appearing to explain something. He was in his late 50s, thin, with the kind of careful stillness she had learned to recognize, not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of someone who had trained themselves out of the tells that most people never knew they had. Holt and Graves did not look at each other when they spoke. This was the thing. They had a conversation that was technically addressed to the broader table about development projects on the South Side, about a zoning dispute she half recognized from the briefing documents. But the real content of it was passing between them in a lateral channel, the meanings living in the pauses, the emphasis, the specific words chosen at specific moments. She had to hear it twice in her head before she understood what she was hearing. They were communicating a timeline, not the timeline of the conversation, a different one. She sat very still and listened with the focused totality of a person for whom listening had always been the primary mode. And she filed every word in the precise, organized way. Her memory filed everything. And she smiled when Diana made a joke and passed the bread when asked and was to every person at the table exactly where she was supposed to be and nothing more. Inside, her heart rate was climbing. She texted Claire from the car on the way back. 4 words, we have a problem. Claire called within 90 seconds. By 11 that night, Emily was back in the nondescript office recounting the conversation from the dinner with the word-for-word precision that still made Claire set down her pen. By midnight, Sal had been briefed. By 12:45, Gabriel Moretti was on the phone, and Emily could hear even through the speaker the quality of his silence when she finished recounting what she had heard. Holt, he said, just as the name. The same way he had said Caruso's name in the private dining room at Benedetti's, with that flat, even this is being filed quality, that told her the information had landed and was now being processed in whatever deep controlled place he processed the things that cost him. The man he was speaking to, Emily said, Graves. He's not in any of the materials I've reviewed. No, Gabriel said, he wouldn't be. A pause. How certain are you about the timeline? They used the phrase end of the month 4 times, Emily said, each time in a sentence that appeared to be about something else. The 4th time Holt touched his wine glass with his index finger when he said it. Just once. Graves nodded a 1/4 inch. She paused. I don't know what the timeline is for. I know there is one, and I know it ends at the end of this month. Silence on the line. Gabriel. She had started using his first name somewhere in the 3rd week. In the way things happen between people who are dealing with serious things together, the formality becomes expensive and you stop paying it. We have 18 days. I know, he said. What is Holt? Another pause. Longer. The quality of it told her he was deciding how much to give her, which she understood she was still new, still unproven in his world, in the specific ways that mattered to him, and she waited without pushing, because pushing was for people who couldn't read rooms. Holt manages 3 significant financial channels, Gabriel said finally. If he is working with someone to compromise those channels at the end of this month, the damage would be considerable. Considerable like business damage, Emily said carefully, or considerable like other things. Both, Gabriel said. She sat with that for a moment. Then we have 18 days to find out what Graves is and what the arrangement is and how deep it goes, she said, and we have to do it without Holt knowing we know. Yes. All right, Emily said. A pause on Gabriel's end. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that would be legible to most people, but Emily was not most people. She heard it, the slight calibration of a man recalibrating his estimation of a situation. You said we, he said. I did, Emily said. She could feel through the phone the thing that happened in him when she said that. She could not see his face, but she had spent enough time in his presence now to understand that some people showed their interior on their face, and some people showed it in their voice, and Gabriel Moretti showed it in his voice, specifically in the small, precise variations of pace and weight that most people couldn't hear because most people weren't listening at the level Emily listened. He was grateful. That was what she heard, not expressed, not performed, but real. 18 days, he said. 18 days, Emily confirmed. The next morning, she was back at Benedetti's for a double shift because life did not pause for consequence. She refilled water glasses. She brought bread to table 7. She apologized with genuine warmth and zero real apology to a man at table 5 who complained that his steak was overcooked when it was she happened to know from watching the kitchen exactly as he had ordered it. At 2:40 in the afternoon between the lunch and dinner shifts, she sat in the break room with a cup of coffee and the mental architecture of everything she knew about Richard Holt arranged in the careful internal grid she used for these things, and she identified 3 gaps. She didn't know who Philip Graves reported to, She didn't know whether the financial channels Holt managed were the actual target or the delivery mechanism. And she didn't know, and this was the one that bothered her most, the one that pressed on the edge of her thinking the way a loose tooth presses on the tongue, whether Holt's arrangement with Graves was connected to Caruso's phone call 3 weeks ago, or whether Gabriel Moretti was dealing with two separate problems that only appeared unrelated. She was still thinking about this when Marco came into the break room, refilled his coffee without looking at her, and said to the room in general, "Someone left a package at the front. Francois is losing his mind about it." Emily looked up. "What kind of package?" Marco shrugged. "Unmarked. He's calling the manager." Emily set down her coffee. She walked to the front of the restaurant. The package was small, brown paper, no labels, sitting on the host stand with the self-contained quality of something that had been placed deliberately rather than delivered accidentally. Francois was on the phone, his back to it, the particular tightness in his shoulders of a man managing a situation he hadn't been trained for. Emily looked at the package. She did not touch it. She looked at the time, 2:51. She pulled out her phone and texted Sal package at Benedetti's front. "Unmarked. No delivery observed. I am not touching it. Tell me what to do." Sal responded in 40 seconds. "Do not touch. Clear the front area casually. We have someone 4 minutes out." She went back to the break room. She told Marco in the easy, unremarkable tone of someone managing a small operational detail that Francois needed the front area clear for a delivery inventory, and could Marco let the bus staff know. Marco said sure without looking up from his phone. The 4 minutes felt like 20. The man Sal sent was someone she hadn't met before, young, nondescript, carrying a clipboard that made him look like any other delivery person. He spent 90 seconds at the front and then left, and 12 minutes later, Sal called her. "It was a phone," Sal said. "Prepaid, one contact saved, no name." Emily's stomach tightened. "Who's the contact?" "We're working on it," said, but Emily, the phone was addressed to you." The break room felt suddenly very small. "To me specifically," she said. "Your name was written on the paper. Handwritten. Nobody on the floor saw it delivered." She sat down. She was aware of this as a physical decision, the deliberate lowering of herself into a chair, because standing seemed to require more certainty than she currently had. Someone knew she was involved. Someone knew her name, knew where she worked, and had delivered a phone to her workplace without being observed. These three facts arranged themselves in her mind with the clinical precision her brain deployed in the moments when her emotions wanted to run and her thinking insisted on staying. Someone was reaching out to her, or someone was warning her. She couldn't yet tell which. "Where is the phone now?" she said. "With our tech people," Sal said. "We're pulling everything we can from it." "The one saved contact," Emily said. "Before you run it, describe the format of the number to me." A pause. She could hear Sal consulting something. He read her the number. She sat very still. She recognized the area code. It was a Chicago area code, but the specific exchange, the first 3 digits after the area code, was a pattern she had seen before. She had seen it in the briefing documents Claire had given her in week 1. She had filed it with the automatic, involuntary precision of her memory and had not thought about it since because it hadn't been relevant. It was relevant now. "Sal," she said carefully, "that exchange, do you know what it corresponds to?" A longer pause. She heard him do something, type or consult or both. Then a silence that was different from the pauses before it, heavier, the silence of someone arriving at an intersection they didn't expect. "Where did you see it?" Sal said. His voice had a new quality. "The briefing documents," Emily said. "Week 1. There was a list of numbers associated with a name. I didn't focus on it because it wasn't relevant to what I was doing at the time." "What name?" Sal said. She closed her eyes. She went into the specific part of her memory where week 1's briefing documents lived, and she found the page, and she found the list, and she found the name next to the exchange. "Graves," Emily said. "Philip Graves." The silence on the line was absolute. Then Sal said in a voice stripped down to its essentials, "I need to call Gabriel." "I know," Emily said. "I'll wait." She sat in the break room at Benedetti's with the sound of the kitchen prepping for the dinner rush coming through the walls and the specific clarifying fear of someone who understood exactly what they had just understood. Philip Graves had sent her a phone. Philip Graves, who had sat across from Richard Holt at a dinner table 2 nights ago and communicated a timeline in a language designed to be invisible to anyone who was actually listening. Philip Graves, who was not in any of the briefing materials and who Sal had confirmed, was someone who wouldn't be. Philip Graves knew who she was, which meant that either her cover had broken, that someone in Gabriel's world had talked, that her presence in these rooms had been flagged and traced back to her real identity, or something more complicated was happening, something she didn't yet have enough information to name. Gabriel called her directly 11 minutes later. "Tell me exactly what you told Sal," he said. No preamble. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, the full and focused reception of information before any response. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. She counted. "Graves reached out to you directly," he said. "It appears so. He knows your name." "Yes." "He knows where you work." "Yes." "Emily." His voice had the weight of someone choosing words with the care of a person who understood that words at this moment were load-bearing. "Is it possible that Graves is not working against me?" She stopped. She heard the question and she turned it over in her mind with the speed and precision of the thinking she was best at running it against everything she had observed, everything she had heard, the way Holt and Graves had spoken at the dinner table, the way Graves had been still with the particular stillness of someone trained out of tells. Someone trained out of tells. "You mean," Emily said slowly, "is it possible that Graves is in the same position I'm in?" "I mean," Gabriel said carefully, "is it possible that the phone is not a threat?" She sat with this for a long moment. "I need to see the phone," she said, "the actual device. I need to know if there are any other messages stored, even deleted ones." "I'll have it back to you within the hour," Gabriel said. "Emily," a pause, "be careful with what this feels like. The instinct to see an ally in someone who reaches out is a real instinct, and sometimes a correct one, and sometimes it is exactly what someone with bad intentions wants you to feel." "I know," Emily said. "Do you?" She thought about the man at the bar who hadn't drunk his drink. She thought about Caruso in the empty booth saying 2 words to a phone. She thought about everything her life had been before 3 weeks ago and what it had cost her to spend 28 years trusting the wrong instincts about her own worth. "I know the difference," she said, "between what I want something to mean and what it actually means." A beat. "Yes," Gabriel said quietly. "I believe you do." The phone arrived at 47 minutes. Claire brought it in person, which told Emily that Gabriel had judged this significant enough to move quickly. There was one additional piece of information the tech team had recovered from the device, a single text message received and deleted, recovered from the buffer in the state it existed in for the 12 minutes between receipt and deletion. The message read, "I know what Holt is planning. I know what Caruso told them. I know you're the one who's been watching. Meet me if you want the rest of it. I am not the enemy here." Emily read it 3 times. Then she set the phone down on the table and looked at Claire. "He knows about Caruso," she said. "Yes," Claire said. "That information was never public," Emily said. "The night at Benedetti's, the phone call, only 4 people knew what Caruso said in that booth." 3, Claire said. "Sal wasn't in the room." Emily looked at her. "Gabriel, Francois, you," Claire said quietly, "and whoever Caruso told." The room shifted around her the way rooms shifted when information reorganized the architecture of everything you thought you understood. "So either Caruso told Graves," Emily said, thinking aloud, not performing the thinking but actually doing it, which means Graves is connected to Caruso, which means the phone is not help, it's a trap. She paused. "Or Graves has a source inside the Caruso situation that isn't Caruso, someone who knows what Caruso said because they were watching Caruso, which means Graves has been running surveillance on the same people we've been looking at." "Yes," Claire said. "Which would make him either a competing threat," Emily said, "or something else entirely." "Yes," Claire said again. Emily picked up the phone. She looked at the deleted message again, at the specific phrasing of it, at the words chosen and the words not chosen, at the way it was structured by someone who knew she would read it with exactly this level of attention. "I am not the enemy here. Not I am your ally. Not trust me. Not I can help you. I am not the enemy here." The phrasing of a person who understood the difference between claiming to be good and claiming to be something more limited and more honest. The phrasing of someone who knew she would hear that distinction. She set the phone down. "I need to tell you something," she said to Claire, "and I need you to tell Gabriel immediately." "What is it?" Emily looked at her hands. She thought about 18 days. She thought about timelines communicated in dinner table code. She thought about the thing that had been sitting at the edge of her thinking since the night of the dinner, the gap she couldn't close, the question of whether Caruso and Holt were connected or separate. I think they're connected, she said, Caruso and Holt. I think what Caruso set in motion the night at Benedetti's and what Holt is planning to execute at the end of this month are the same operation. Caruso started it. Holt finishes it. And whoever sent me this phone, she said, touching the device with one finger, knows the whole shape of it and has known it longer than we have. Claire was very still. If I'm right, Emily said, then this isn't two problems. It's one problem that's been running longer than Gabriel knows, and we have 17 days left. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She had a dinner shift in 2 hours and she was going to work it because she was still a waitress at Benedetti's and the floor needed covering, and table 7 always needed extra bread. But she turned at the door. Tell Gabriel, she said, that I think we should answer the phone. Gabriel said no. Not immediately. He sat with her recommendation for 6 hours, which she knew, because Claire texted her at 11 that night, then again at 1 in the morning, then again at 2:47 with the single word still. Emily was awake for all of it. She had stopped pretending she was going to sleep somewhere around midnight and had made another cup of tea that went cold and had sat at her kitchen table in the specific silence of someone waiting for a decision that was not hers to make. At 3:12 in the morning, Gabriel called. No, he said. Emily had expected this. She had prepared for it. She had arranged her response in advance with the care of someone who understood that the first 10 seconds of a disagreement determined the shape of everything that followed. Tell me why, she said. Not you're wrong, not I disagree. Tell me why, because she genuinely wanted to know his reasoning, and because a man who trusted you with the why was a man you could actually work with. Because Graves reaching out directly to you means he knows your role, Gabriel said. Which means if this is a trap, if the phone is a move rather than an approach, then answering it confirms everything he's testing. It tells him you're operational. It tells him you have enough access to make decisions. It hands him leverage. And if it's not a trap, Emily said, then we find another way to get what he knows. Gabriel, she kept her voice even, we have 16 days. Whatever Holt is planning executes in 16 days, and we still don't know what it is specifically or who else is involved or how the Caruso connection runs. Graves has the whole picture. He said so. And he reached out to me, not to your security team, not to Sal, not to you, to me, which means he has assessed this situation and decided that I am the person in it most likely to listen without reacting badly. Silence. That's either a very sophisticated manipulation, Emily continued, or it's accurate. And if it's accurate, then refusing to answer that phone costs us the one person who can give us the complete picture before the deadline. More silence. The quality of it told her he was not dismissing her. He was actually thinking, which was one of the things she had come to respect about him. He thought rather than decided, which was rarer than it should have been in people with his kind of power. What would you say to him? Gabriel asked. If I said yes. I don't know yet, Emily said. I'd want to hear him first. A long pause. One condition, Gabriel said. Name it. You don't meet him alone, not physically. If it gets to a physical meeting, Sal is within 30 seconds of you at all times. Agreed, Emily said. Another pause. Shorter. Answer the phone, Gabriel said. She called the number at 9 the following morning. She had slept 4 hours, which was not enough, and was also more than she'd expected, the sleep of a person whose body had decided that anxiety was less important than function. The line rang twice. I wondered if you'd call, said Philip Graves. His voice was calm and measured with the particular quality of someone who had long since stopped performing calm and was simply operating from it. She filed this immediately. You sent me a phone, Emily said, with a message that told me you knew things I needed to know and that you weren't the enemy. That's a very specific kind of reach out. It was meant to bow, Graves said. I needed you to take it seriously without feeling threatened. Did it work? I'm on the phone, Emily said, a sound that might have been a quiet acknowledgement. Fair enough. How do you know about Caruso? She said. Directly without setup, because she had decided in the 4 hours of sleep and the hour of preparation before the call that directness was the right register for this conversation. Graves had reached out to her specifically. He had written the message for someone who read carefully. He did not need managing. A pause on his end, measured, not evasive. Because I've been watching Caruso for 14 months, Graves said. Not for Gabriel Moretti, for someone else. And the night you walked that man out of Benedetti's and made a phone call that saved Moretti's life, I was outside that building watching Caruso's phone traffic. I heard the call he made from the booth. Emily sat very still. Who do you work for? She said. That's a longer conversation, Graves had said, and not one for this channel. Then what can you tell me right now? I can tell you that what Richard Holt is executing in 16 days is not primarily a financial attack, Graves said. The financial channels are the mechanism. The actual target is Moretti standing with 3 specific partners who have been with him for over a decade. The plan is to make it appear that Moretti diverted funds from shared accounts Holt manages into private holdings. By the time the partners audit, the evidence will be constructed well enough that even a thorough review will take months to disprove. In that time, 2 of those 3 partners will pull out. Without them, Moretti's legitimate operations lose their structural foundation. Emily processed this in real time, fitting it against everything she already knew. Filling gaps, creating new ones. Caruso set it up, she said. Caruso spent 11 years building Moretti's trust specifically to be in position to do exactly this, Graves said. He wasn't turned recently, he was placed. The kitchen felt suddenly very cold. Placed, Emily repeated. The man at Benedetti's that night, Graves said, the one you walked out. He wasn't there to hurt Moretti physically. He was there to deliver something to Caruso, documents, the final layer of the constructed evidence. You walking him out didn't stop the plan, it delayed the delivery. Caruso got the documents another way 3 days later. Emily put her hand flat on the kitchen table. She needed the solidity of it. You're telling me, she said carefully, that the night I thought I prevented something, I only delayed it. You saved Moretti from understanding that the plan was already in motion, Graves said, which bought time, which is why I'm talking to you now instead of watching this detonate in 16 days. Who placed Caruso? Emily said. The pause this time was different, longer. The pause of someone at a door deciding whether to open it. The answer to that question, Graves said, is why I need a face-to-face meeting. It's not something I'm saying on a phone. Why me? Emily said. Why not go to Moretti directly or to law enforcement if you're working for? Because the person who placed Caruso, to Graves said quietly, has relationships with law enforcement in the city that make that option complicated. And because going to Moretti directly without an intermediary, he trusts completely, will trigger a response before we're ready for it. He will move on Caruso and Holt before we have the full picture and the person at the top of this walks away clean. A pause. You are the intermediary he trusts. I've been watching long enough to know that. Emily closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When and where, she said. The meeting was set for 2 days out. A public place, a coffee shop in Wicker Park, busy. Claude's response was interrupted. Try again. The coffee shop in Wicker Park was exactly the kind of place where nobody looked at anyone else, which was why Graves had chosen it and why Emily had approved it when Sal ran the location check. She arrived 7 minutes early, ordered a coffee she didn't particularly want, and sat at the table in the middle of the room. Not a corner, not a wall seat, the middle, where she could be seen from every angle and where anyone watching would have no reason to assign significance to a heavy-set woman in a gray coat waiting for a friend. Sal was outside. 2 of his people were inside, one at the counter, one near the door, both convincingly ordinary. Graves walked in at exactly the agreed time, which told her something. People who arrived exactly on time to meetings like this were people who had been waiting nearby, watching the approach, running their own assessment before committing. She filed this without changing her expression. He looked smaller in daylight than he had at the dinner table. Not physically, he was the same height, the same lean build, but the controlled stillness that had read as formidable in a dim dining room translated differently in the ordinary light of a busy coffee shop. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had made a decision recently to put it down. He sat across from her without ordering anything. You came alone, he said, scanning the room with the automatic professional sweep she recognized. I came with people who are better at being invisible than you are at spotting them, Emily said pleasantly. Which means for all practical purposes, yes, I came alone. Something in his expression shifted. Not a fence closer to the recognition she had seen in Gabriel's face that first night. the particular recalibration of someone encountering a thing they had been told about, but had not fully anticipated. Fair, he said. Talk to me, Emily said. We have 14 days, and you said you had the full picture. Give it to me. Graves leaned forward slightly. He folded his hands on the table and looked at her with the directness of someone who had decided that all the time for careful navigation was behind him. The person who placed Caruso inside Moretti's organization 11 years ago, he said, is a man named Douglas Hale. Emily kept her face entirely still. She knew the name. She knew it from the briefing documents and from the broader Chicago landscape that she had been absorbing for the past month with the systematic thoroughness she applied to everything. Douglas Hale was not in Gabriel's world. He was several layers above it, a financier, a political donor, a man whose name appeared on the boards of institutions rather than in the operations of them. He was the kind of person who existed at the level where power stopped needing to announce itself. Haley has been building a position for 11 years, Graves said. Caruso was the instrument. The goal was never to destroy Moretti. Directly destroying someone like Moretti directly creates attention, investigations, complications. The goal was to hollow him out, to remove the structural relationships that make his organization stable, discredit him with his own partners, and then acquire the legitimate business assets at collapse pricing while Moretti is too busy defending himself to protect them. Emily listened without interrupting. Holt is Hale's man, Graves continued, has been for 4 years. He was introduced into Moretti's circle through a channel that appeared organic, a referral from a shared business contact who had no idea he was being used. In 4 years, Holt has positioned himself to manage the exact financial channels that will be used to construct the fraudulent evidence. And you, Emily said, where do you fit? Graves was quiet for a moment. The tiredness she had noted when he walked in became more visible. It moved from behind his eyes to the surface. I worked for Hale, he said, for 6 years. I was one of the people who managed the long game operations, the placements, the setups, the construction of situations that look like accidents. I was good at it. He said this last part without pride, with the flat factual quality of someone taking inventory of things they were no longer certain were assets. 14 months ago, I was given it the full picture of the Moretti operation for the first time. The complete plan. All of it. He paused. I had a problem with it. What kind of problem? Emily said. The kind that keeps you awake, Graves said. Hale's previous operations there was always a logic to them. Business logic, cold as it was. The targets were people who had done things that made them, in a certain light, legitimate targets. Moretti is not that. Moretti is a man who built something real, and he has spent the last several years trying to move it towards something cleaner than where it started. And Hale wants to take it apart for the same reason you take apart any machine to use the pieces for something else. He looked at his hands. I spent 6 years being the person who made that kind of thing possible. I decided 14 months ago that I was done. Emily studied him. She was running everything he had said against everything she knew the way she ran, everything looking for the places where the seams showed where the shape of the story didn't quite match the shape of the facts. It matched. That was the thing that settled in her chest with the specific weight of certainty. It matched at every point she could check it against, and the points she couldn't check it against had the texture of things that would check out rather than things being carefully avoided. You said you were watching Caruso for 14 months, she said. Who were you watching him for after you left Hale? Myself, Graves said simply. I've been building a case. Documentation, financial records, communications. Enough to make the full picture undeniable. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, in the way of someone who understood that this particular gesture required telegraphing, and placed a drive on the table. Small, silver, unremarkable. Everything is on there, 14 months of it. Caruso, Holt, Hale, the channel mechanics, the evidence construction plan, the timeline, the names of the law enforcement contacts Hale has relationships with, and the documentation of those relationships. Emily looked at the drive. She did not touch it. Why not take this directly to federal authorities, she said. If the local contacts are compromised, there are federal channels that Hale's relationships don't reach. There are, Graves said, and that's eventually where this needs to go. But if this goes to federal authorities before Moretti knows the full picture, the first thing that happens is an investigation that treats Moretti as a subject rather than a victim. He doesn't have the documentation to defend himself yet because he doesn't know what he's defending himself against. The constructed evidence gets discovered before the real evidence is in place to refute it. And Hale's lawyers spend 8 months creating enough ambiguity to walk him out clean. He paused. Moretti needs to know everything on that drive before anyone else does. He needs time, even a few days, to secure the legitimate relationships and brief his own legal team. Then the federal referral happens from a position of documented victim rather than investigated subject. Emily sat with this. She turned it over with the methodical care she gave to the things that mattered most, looking for the flaw, the angle, the thing that was designed to be found and was actually a door into something else. She didn't find one. "I'm going to take this to Gabriel today," she said, "and I need you to be available, directly available, phone on, ready to speak with him and with his legal team. He will have questions I can't answer." "I know," Graves said. "That's why I'm still in Chicago." Emily finally picked up the drive. She held it in her palm for a moment, this small, cold silver thing that contained 14 months of someone's conscience, working its way back from a place it had gone wrong. "Why me?" she said again. Not the strategic version of the question she had asked on the phone, but the real one. "You could have gone to Sal. You could have found a way to get this to Gabriel's legal team directly. Why did you specifically decide that I was the door?" Graves looked at her for a long moment. "Because the night at Benedetti's," he said, "I watched you walk a problem out of a restaurant using nothing but your presence and your judgment in a way that protected everyone in that room, including a man you had no obligation to protect. And then I watched you make a phone call that told me you understood not just what had happened, but what it meant." He paused. "You're the only person in this entire situation who has been operating from the right reasons since the beginning. That matters. In a situation where everybody has an angle, the person without one is the person you trust." Emily looked at him. She thought about Marco and the water pitchers and 6 years of being furniture that talked. She thought about Gabriel's question in the private dining room, "Why would you risk yourself?" She thought about her own answer and how it had surprised her, even as she gave it the honesty of it landing differently than she expected. Like hearing your own voice on a recording and finding it sounds more like you than you thought. She put the drive in her coat pocket. "I'll call you within 2 hours," she said. "Stay close." She was in the Aldridge building by 11:43. Gabriel read her face before she said a word. She had noticed he did this, absorb the information available before requesting more, which was both efficient, and she had come to understand a habit built from years of environments where what people didn't say was more important than what they did. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand for this part," Emily said, and she told him. She told him everything: Hale, the 11-year placement, Caruso's actual role, Holt's mechanics, the constructed evidence, the timeline, the drive in her pocket. She told him in the order it needed to be understood, not the order she had received it, because she had spent the walk from the coffee shop to the Aldridge building, arranging it into the shape that would land most clearly. She told him the way she told him everything, directly without softening, trusting him to be the person she had come to know him as, rather than managing him toward a reaction she had predecided was appropriate. When she finished, Gabriel sat very still. He had not moved through most of it. His hands were flat on the desk. His face had done the thing it sometimes did, not gone blank, but gone inward, all the processing happening behind a surface that gave nothing away. "Douglas Hale," he said. "Yes." A silence. She let it be. "I've known Douglas Hale for 9 years, Gabriel said. "We've been at the same tables, the same fundraisers." Something moved across his face, not quite anger, not quite grief, the complicated expression of a man accounting for what it meant to have been looked at that long by someone who was deciding how to dismantle him. "I shook his hand 3 weeks ago at a benefit for the Children's Hospital." "I know," Emily said quietly. "I was there." He looked at her. "I didn't know what I was looking at yet," she said. "I know now." He stood. He moved to the window in the way he sometimes did when something needed processing that his body couldn't do sitting still. She waited. "The drive," he said. She placed it on the desk. He looked at it without picking it up. "You trust Graves?" "I trust that the information on this drive is real," Emily said carefully. "Whether Graves's reasons for giving it to us are entirely what he says they are, I think they're close enough to what he says that it doesn't change what we do with it. The drive either has what he says it has or it doesn't. Your tech people will know within an hour." Gabriel nodded once the decision nod she had come to recognize. He picked up the drive. He pressed the intercom on his desk and said, "Get Claire and get the legal team on the phone now." What followed was not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes made these things dramatic. It was urgent and exhausting and required an enormous amount of very fast, very precise thinking from a number of very capable people in a room that became progressively more crowded over the course of the afternoon. Emily sat in the corner and was available when needed, which was frequent knowing because she was the person who had heard everything firsthand and remembered it with the accuracy that continued to arrest people when they encountered it for the first time. The drive contained exactly what Graves had said it contained. Claire confirmed this at 2:17 in the afternoon, looking up from her laptop with an expression that told Emily everything before she said a word. At 2:19, Gabriel's lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had the focused intensity of someone who ran exclusively on competence and black coffee, said, "We need to move on the legitimate partner relationships today, before close of business." "Do it," Gabriel said, and the federal referral, Patricia said, needs to happen in the next 48 hours. Once we have the partners secured and the documentation in order, we go to the FBI Financial Crimes Division directly, not through any local channel. "Agreed," Gabriel said. He looked at Emily. "Graves, he'll speak to Patricia directly." "He's waiting for my call," Emily said. "Make it," Gabriel said. She stepped into the hallway and called Graves. He picked up on the first ring. She gave him Patricia's direct number. There was a pause on his end that was brief and had the quality of someone arriving at the end of something they had been moving toward for a long time. "Thank you," he said. "Thank yourself," Emily said. "You did the hard part. You built the case. You made the call." "You answered the phone," Graves had said. "Not everyone would have." She didn't have an answer for that. She said goodbye and went back into the room. The next 11 days were the longest of Emily Parker's life, measured not in hours, but in the specific density of consequence, the way certain periods compress time by filling every available moment with something that matters. Gabriel moved on their partner relationships with the speed and precision of someone who had been preparing for a version of this for years without knowing what form it would take. Two of the three partners, when presented with the full documentation, responded with the controlled fury of people who had been targeted alongside him. The third, an older man named Benedek, who had known Gabriel for 20 years, sat across from him in the Aldridge conference room and said quietly that he had always thought Douglas Hale smiled too quickly and that he should have said so sooner. Richard Holt was not moved on immediately, and this required more patience than Gabriel had, or more precisely required more patience than he displayed, because Emily was present for the conversation, where Patricia explained why they had to wait, and Gabriel's jaw did the thing it did when he was constraining a reaction, and Emily watched him choose the constraint deliberately and felt something that was not quite pride but was adjacent to it. Holt had to be allowed to execute enough of the plan that the documented intent became documented action. This was Patricia's reasoning, clinical and correct, and it cost everyone in that room something to accept it, because letting someone execute a plan you knew about felt like complicity even when it was strategy. On the 9th day, Holt moved the first layer of funds through the channels in the pattern the constructed evidence was designed to create. The FBI Financial Crimes Team, who had been briefed and prepared for 4 days by that point, had it documented within hours. On the 10th day, Douglas Hale was in a meeting at his foundation offices when 3 federal agents arrived, which Emily knew because Sal told her, and Sal's account of Hale's expression in that moment had a quality of cold satisfaction that she understood without endorsing. On the 11th day, Vincent Caruso, who had been under surveillance since the night Emily had named him, who had continued his daily routines with the practiced normalcy of a man who believed he was still invisible, was taken into federal custody at 7:40 in the morning outside his apartment building. She heard about this while she was starting a double shift at Benedetti's from a text from Claire that contained only "It's done." She stood in the Benedetti's break room and read those 2 words and thought about Caruso in the booth saying those same 2 words into his phone, and the circularity of it landed with the specific weight of things that meant something, even when you couldn't entirely articulate what. She finished her shift. 3 days later, she handed in her notice at Benedetti's. Francois received this with the expression of a man who had been expecting it and had still not entirely prepared for it. He stood behind the host stand and looked at her notice handwritten, 2 weeks professional and complete, and then looked at her. "You're going to do something important," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to try," Emily said. He nodded. He folded the notice carefully, which was not something he needed to do with a piece of paper he was about to file, but people did things like that when they needed a moment. "You were always the best server I had," he said. "I should have said so more often." "You could have," Emily agreed without bitterness, because bitterness required holding on to something she had already decided to put down. He extended his hand. She shook it. She went back to the floor and worked the lunch shift for the last time, and she refilled water glasses and brought bread to table 7 and managed a complaint at table 3 with warmth and zero real apology. And she did all of it with the attentiveness she had always brought to it, because the work deserved that regardless of whether she was staying. At the end of the shift, Marco was cashing out beside her at the service station. He glanced at her. "Heard you're leaving," he said. "End of 2 weeks," Emily said. He was quiet for a moment. He had the particular quality of someone trying to formulate something that didn't come naturally to him, working against the grain of a personality that had never had much reason to try. "You were good at this," he said finally. "Like actually good. I don't think I ever said that." "You didn't," Emily said. "A beat." "I'm saying it now," he said. She looked at him. He looked slightly uncomfortable, which she decided was appropriate and also sufficient. "Thank you, Marco," she said, and meant it cleanly and without complication, because the grace of finally knowing your own worth was that other people's belated recognition of it stopped being the thing you were waiting for. She walked out of Benedetti's at 3:47 in the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk in January air that was sharp enough to remind you that you were alive, and she was not afraid. Gabriel's offer, formalized now through Patricia's office with all the legal architecture that entailed, was real and specific and considerable. She would work with Claire's team directly. She would be given access, resources, context, and the particular freedom of someone who had proven they could be trusted with the full picture. She would be compensated in a way that still startled her when she let herself think about it. Not because she hadn't deserved it all along, but because the distance between deserving something and receiving it turned out to be a specific and navigable distance after all. She had signed the paperwork 2 days before she gave Benedetti's her notice. 6 weeks later, Emily Parker stood at a major charity event at the Chicago Cultural Center, wearing a navy dress she had bought without apologizing to herself for wanting to look good beside Diana Voss, who had become over the preceding weeks something between a colleague and a genuine friend. The room was full of the people she had spent a month observing from the periphery, the same powerful, wealthy, influential Chicago that had moved through Benedetti's without seeing her. They saw her now. Not all of them, not overnight. It didn't work that way, and she had no interest in the version of this story where suddenly everyone understood her worth because someone important had validated it. That story had always seemed, even before she understood why, like the wrong ending. Like it was still making other people's perception the point. What had changed was inside her, and inside had changed outside in the specific, irreversible way of things that happened from the center rather than the surface. She stood differently. She spoke first instead of waiting to be addressed. She offered her analysis in rooms where a month ago she would have been taking notes. Not because she had been given permission, but because she understood now that she had always had it and had simply been waiting for a version of the world that confirmed what she already knew. A young woman approached her near the end of the evening, early 20s, clearly working the event in a support capacity with the careful and visible furniture posture Emily recognized in her bones. "Excuse me," the young woman said. She had the look of someone who had gathered courage to ask something. "I heard you used to be a server. Before all," she gestured vaguely at the room. "This." "I was a server for 6 years," Emily said, "at Benedetti's 3 blocks from here." The young woman looked at her with the specific quality of someone trying to map the distance between 2 points that seemed too far apart. "How did you," she started, and then stopped, and then tried again. "What changed?" Emily looked at her. She thought about the question not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer deserved the respect of being said carefully. "I stopped waiting for someone else to see what I already knew," Emily said. "That's all it was. I had always been capable of everything I'm doing now. I just kept waiting for permission that was never coming." She paused. "The world will tell you what you're worth based on what it can see. Don't let it. What you're worth is in what you do and what you notice and what you're willing to act on when it matters." She held the young woman's gaze. "Those things don't get smaller because someone doesn't look at you." The young woman stood very still for a moment, Then she nodded with the precise quality of someone receiving something they were going to keep. Gabriel found Emily near the end of the evening the way he sometimes appeared at the end of conversations she was having, not interrupting, waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that the moments worth arriving for were usually already in progress. She saw him approaching and finished what she was saying to the deputy commissioner she'd been talking to and turned. "How are you?" he said. It was a simple question. He had started asking it in the past few weeks with the specific quality of someone who wanted the real answer, rather than the social one, and she had started giving it. "Good," she said. "Actually good." He looked at her with the expression she had first seen in the private dining room at Benedetti's, the one that had no architecture, the one that was simply honest. "You look it," he said. "Don't sound so surprised," Emily said. "I'm not surprised," Gabriel said. He paused, the pause of a man for whom the precise word mattered. "Glad," he said finally. "I'm glad." Across the room, Diana Voss caught Emily's eye and raised her glass very slightly, the private acknowledgement of a woman who had watched something happen from close enough to understand what it had cost and what it had been worth. Emily raised her own glass in return. She thought about the December night with the snow coming down and the dining room full of people performing warmth, and the man at the bar with the untouched glass and the choice she had made in that moment. Not the dramatic choice, not the choice that required courage she didn't know she had, but the smaller, more fundamental one. The choice to trust what she knew, to act on what she saw, to stop mistaking the world's failure to notice her for evidence that there was nothing there to notice. That choice had been available to her every day of her life. She had been the one keeping it. She set her glass down. She straightened her shoulders. She turned back to the room, not because she needed it to see her now, but because she finally had something she wanted to give it. She had always been the woman who noticed everything. What she understood now fully and permanently, and without the shadow of doubt that had lived in her for 28 years, was that being seen had never been the point. The point was always what she did with what she saw, and she was only just beginning.